After years of waiting, The Acolyte has finally hit the Disney Plus streaming service, but does it live up to the expectations? The date is July 13th, 2024, and you're listening to episode 76 of the Star Wars Canon Podcast.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the relaunch of the Star Wars Canon Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Miller, and I'm so glad you decided to join me to talk about our favorite thing in the world yet again, that mystical galaxy far, far away, Star Wars. We all love it. We all know it. This week, we are breaking down what we've gotten so far out of the Acolyte. But before we get into all of that, I want to bring in the panel for this episode, and I've got a couple of guys with me. You guys, I'm sure you guys know and love. First off, I've got Mr. Steven with me. Steven, how are you today?
It's great to be back, Brian. I feel like it's been a long time since our last episode, and luckily you and me and Nick and a few other guys, we've been able to stay in touch through our group chat, but just to kind of get back on the mic and get to see each other in person. Thanks for inviting me on tonight.
Tell everybody where you're from also. That way everybody kind of has an idea of how far apart we are. I mean, we're spread all over the place.
Yeah, I'm from, it's called Indiana, Pennsylvania. It's about an hour to the east of Pittsburgh, so not too far. And I know one of our other co-hosts, JG, is from Pittsburgh as well, so I've met up with him at least once. So you've kind of put together like your own team here, which I've, again, appreciate too.
No, absolutely. That's awesome. And I'm hoping we all get together at some point. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Also with us, Nick Albers from all the way from, where are you at in Texas, Nick?
The great city of San Antonio. So
San Antonio.
It's great to be back and everything. Like you said, Brian, I think the last show everybody was on was over a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And happy to be part of the relaunch and happy to be talking about Star Wars. And, despite the fact that what some people may think, I actually do love Star Wars, as you can see. It's, but I can be a bit of a grumpy Jedi at times. So I'm happy to be back.
That. Luke was a grumpy Jedi too there for a little while, so don't feel bad about it, man. Hey, we've got quite a bit to talk about for this week. Let's make some people mad, because I think we're going to talk about a subject that's pretty touchy right now. And it's a topic that I don't even know really how to measure it. I don't even know if it's down the middle. I don't know if it's a silent majority. I don't know if it's a loud majority. I want to get your guys' opinions on this. But let's talk about the Acolyte. The Acolyte premiered on June 5th with 2 episodes on first debut, and since then has released a new episode every Tuesday evening. This show, for me anyway, we're going to break down each episode as we go through, because this coming week is the finale. And I figured we would kind of talk about what we've gotten out of the show so far, and then kind of go into what we think is going to happen in the final episode. But, those first 2 episodes that came out, I really enjoyed. I thought it kind of set the tone a little bit for the show. And I was kind of cautiously optimistic after those first 2 episodes. And I was ready. I was looking forward to episode 3. Steven, when you watched these first 2 episodes, kind of what were your thoughts? How did you think it was a good foundation for the show? Kind of what were you expecting out of this?
Yeah, I have a love-hate show because, even the panel tonight, we don't all agree. And that's the nice thing about the hosts of, 1138. We don't always have to agree on everything, but we're very still cordial, and we can explain our thoughts and have our difference of opinions and not lose friendships over it. And so I love the High Republic, just the initiative itself. I've enjoyed most of the stories through that. That's one of my favorite eras of Star Wars. So I came into this without really knowing what to expect, but in hopes that it was going to be like the next big thing that was going to get people to go back and read these books and comics they haven't read. And I don't think that's what we're getting out of it. And the reason I say I love hate it is because I personally am someone who loves to spend time in this galaxy far, far away. And I am less critical than others in that fact that I love just getting to explore and see new things. And, I'm not the one that's currently making the stories. So I kind of go along for the ride more often than not. And the reason I say hate is because I had two different cousins reach out to me after the first week with the first two episodes, and they were both bashing it. And I found out very quickly that one cousin did not even watch the first two, and they just wanted to bash it because they knew they'd get a rise out of me, which they did. And I kind of shut that down because the other cousin who was trying to have a conversation with me, he at least had watched the first two episodes. And I said, I'd much rather talk to that person because you actually, if you watched it and it wasn't for you, I can talk to you about my thoughts. I want to hear your thoughts. But if you just want to talk to me and bash it like online, what you see online and just repeat that, I don't really have much time for that conversation. So that's why I'm at a love-hate relationship, especially after that first week. What about you, Nick?
Like Brian, I was very cautiously optimistic when it was announced, as I mentioned, in 2020. I think like a lot of other people, this was probably the one show a lot of people were really excited about because we were thinking about we might be Plagueis. We might get to see, a lot of these, an era, like you mentioned, Steve, in Star Wars that we've never seen before. It had its issues, the first two episodes, like, any show does. But for me, it just, I went into it and it's like, no, I'm going to give it a fair chance, despite, the reviews coming out from all over the joint, just completely downgrading it. And like you said, bashing it for no apparent reason. And episode 3 came, and to me, episode 3 might single-handedly be the worst piece of Star Wars I have ever seen in my entire life. And it has nothing to do with all the, it's woke and everything. The show's not woke at all. The writing itself, to me, just was not hitting. A show that is supposed to get me interested in the characters right away, where I was not getting interested in the characters at all. And then episode 4 and 5 were just, everybody saw who the Sith behind the mask was. Everybody could call that from a mile away. And then the lightsaber duel in episode 5, to me, was just, there was no vested interest for me in that lightsaber duel at all. Every other lightsaber duel that I have seen in Star Wars, from episode 1 all the way through the Clone Wars and the Rise of Skywalker, and the Rise of Skywalker, I think a lot of people can admit it, did not do a good job in wrapping up the Skywalker saga. But you could at least say there was emotional connection. You had emotional connection in the lightsaber fight. I had none of that in episode 5. And I felt the character of Osha and May during the middle portion of the season just went from one extreme to the next. And I think it's May who is the acolyte. She wants to kill all the Jedi, but then she doesn't. She wants to turn herself in, but then she wants to turn around and kill all the Jedi again. It's like, make up your mind. So that's where it was for me. And then, and I was like, you know what? And God bless JG. That he is a high Republican. He loves the show, and I give him credit for it. And I'm glad he loves the show. It just isn't doing it for me. And then episode 6 was actually, I was like, hey, that wasn't horrible. I thought Master Vanessa Rowe, I believe her name is, you know, whenever she's on screen, I don't care that she's on screen. And to me, it's just a waste of space. But then episode 7, which came out on Tuesday, as I mentioned, might actually be some of the best Star Wars storytelling, which is a different point of view from episode 3. But it might actually be the best Star Wars storytelling we've probably had since Andor. So I know they're setting it up for a season 2, but I think at this point in time, I just don't know if I have the vested interest to go into a season 2. What about you, Brian?
I definitely see kind of where you're coming from with the character development a little bit. It's hard to get you really have to work on your character development, especially when you're working on a time period nobody is really familiar with, and when you're introducing all these new characters that we don't know anything about, in the past. But look at the prequels. They introduced us to Qui-Gon Jinn right off the bat. We cared. That was awesome. They introduced us to Darth Maul, which went on to be one of the coolest villains ever, right? And so, like, it just depends. I think it's the way they're telling the story. Now that we only have one episode left, they've done a lot of. It's like Yoda put this thing together. Like it's all over the place at this point, and I get why they did it. I see the value in it. I do think it works to a degree. This last episode I thought was a great episode. I thought it was great finally kind of getting some of these reveals of stuff that we had seen in the first 2 episodes. Like Nick said, from a certain point of view, from their point of view, kind of how everything kind of went down, everything. And I can appreciate the story they're trying to tell. I think they're dragging their feet though on getting this show out. I don't know if it needed to be 8 episodes, to be honest. And that's just me. We can talk about that here in a minute, but the first 2 episodes I thought they were a pretty decent foundation. Like I said earlier, I was cautiously optimistic going into episode 3. Episode 3, I know, stirred up a whirlwind of just crap online, and I saw a lot of the vitriol online and on Twitter and on Facebook, and I mean, just it's one of those things. It's like with episode 8. I said back in the day, I understand why people don't like it. I can understand where they're coming from. But to me, it wasn't that big of a deal. The whole Anakin thing, or not the Anakin thing, the whole like being conceived by the midichlorians thing. It was one of those things that happened where I was like, just watch the whole story. By the time you get the whole story, maybe it'll make sense. Maybe this is how the Sith find out how to create Anakin later down the road, something like that. I don't, and we're still 1 episode away from seeing the fruition of that entire, the whole show. But I'm trying to hold my tongue on a lot of stuff until I see the last episode, story-wise, just so that, they put that bow on top to wrap everything together. But 3, there were some things in 3 that I liked. There were things, it was kind of, to me, it was kind of jarring to just get a flashback episode in the middle of the season out of nowhere. But it kind of goes towards the method of which they're telling the story, and kind of out of order and teasing you a little bit here and then giving it to you later. And you're like, oh, okay. So that's why they got up. It kind of has this like Back to the Future 2 kind of feel, or 3, when they're seeing each other, or like when they're seeing themselves from a distance. And then, you know what I mean? And you kind of see, it kind of has that feel to it a little bit after watching episodes 1 through, 6, and then watching 7 for me last night. But I think there are definite issues with the series. 4 was just the 4th episode was just kind of forgettable, like non-memorable for me for some reason. The 5th episode, obviously that's the one everybody was talking about, with the big lightsaber battle going down, and the introduction of the Sith, which, I'm sorry, I don't know how you guys feel about this reveal of the Sith Lord, but I'll tell you what, that was the most predictable reveal I've ever seen in anything. I mean, I had this hunch, and I was telling Kirsty also, because I told her he's the Sith Lord, he's the Sith, and she's like, no, it's not, they're not gonna make it that obvious. I'm like, he's the Sith, I guarantee it. And she goes, what makes you think that? He's like all like, he's a wiener. And I was like, Palpatine pretended to be this frail old man in front of the Jedi. He hid himself from the Jedi for decades. right under their noses, having meetings with them face to face, and hit himself and was this frail old man, and turned out to be, and then he goes from being a frail old man to doing this like 720 degree like prone spin over his desk at the Jedi when they come to arrest him. Like, he just unlocks the badass, right? And it just comes out. The facade goes away, and so I was like, this guy is the Sith Lord, I guarantee it. He's like too mousy. He's too much of a wiener. And when he gets caught upside down, and like Nick said earlier, May just like comes in. She's like, I'm just going to turn myself into the Jedi. I'm just going to do this, and it's going to be fine. And they'll have mercy and everything. And then runs off. And then the Sith Lord shows up, which, by the way, is one of the coolest entrances. It's weird how it was the most predictable thing, but it was so cool the way they did it. He had one of the coolest entrances ever. But to have him come in and just basically mop the floor with all of these Jedi was something to behold. Like Nick, what did you think of this lightsaber battle? You kind of touched on it a little bit while ago. What did you think of this battle? Like the whole cortosis being brought into it, the headbutting, the lightsabers and knocking them out, which I thought was awesome. I'm just saying. But what did you think about that? Did you think it was a nice touch? I mean, kind of what did the battle of that episode do for you?
Like just from watching it, it was an amazing. It was amazing choreography. And my apologies if you hear kids in the background. Those are my children watching a movie and being loud. But what every Star Wars lightsaber fight, since 1977 that has come out, you had some sort of emotional interest in it. And I did not have it with this one. And if you're going to have a lightsaber fight, make it of value, make you have an emotional connection. I've been, preaching about this in our group chat for weeks, and whether it's fair or not, the ACOLYTE came out, and what has come out right after that? Season 2, The House of the Dragon. Now, some of our colleagues have said, well, they really don't cater to the same. There's a lot of crossover. And every fight, every battle you get in House of the Dragon, there is an emotional investment. There wasn't in the lightsaber fight in episode 5, the 5th episode, in which you pretty much had the version of the red suits or the red uniforms from Star Trek getting all killed off. That's where I felt. Now, the lightsaber battle between Cal Naka and Soul and Bearded Tommen from, by the way, Game of Thrones was freaking phenomenal. You had emotional investment. That to me was more of an emotional invested fight than the one in episode 5. Steve, what do you think about that?
Yeah, when they were making the show, I remember there was a quote that came out that said there was choreography in this lightsaber fight that in somewhere in the ACOLYTE that was going to challenge the Duel of the Fates. And at first, that's a big bold statement to make. And I think, personally, my opinion, it kind of lives up to that height. Like you said, Nick, the choreography was great. And, I remember going into week 5, how there were going to be like all these social media predictions of who was going to die. Like I figured Soul would survive. And a lot of people were predicting like they were going to wipe everyone else out. And I really felt like that would have been huge. Like I didn't think Jackie and Yord would have both been killed. And so to kill off 2 leads in this, again, what's right now a season 1, it kind of shocked me that there was so much death and brutality in that. And like, unlike other fantasy, projects that we watch, that we talk, this one typically, like a lot of times to kill off that many, they usually kind of stay dead. So it's kind of like surprising that they killed off a good chunk of our main cast, like even Indara, who died in the very first episode. So with this one, I'll be honest, like I felt like I probably had more of a connection to Jackie than Nick. I know you didn't really connect with the characters as much. So like seeing Jackie have the 3 holes go right through her, like that was something I kind of audibly gasped at. I felt like I wish I would have gotten to know her more, and like some of the other Jedi as well. Like I knew those background red shirts that you talked about, Nick, were not going to make it, but like to see Jackie killed with 3 holes, to see Yord have his neck snapped like that, it took a toll. And I think like just that trying to figure out who he is, and then like the reveal of who he is, like Brian was talking about when he first came down, and then the way that the camera pans out whenever Jackie's body falls and you see his actual face for the first time, even though again it was very, very predictable. It did land with me. And not to go off on too much of a tangent, I think I sent you both a video. I just recently kind of redid my basement and added some like lights and surround sound down there. So like anytime there's like a red and blue lightsaber on the screen, like it flashes around my basement. So that's the only way I can watch lightsaber battles. And now like whenever I have family or friends over, I always test it out by showing them the Battle of Mustafar, because it just looks amazing with the lava and the lightsaber. So that's the end of my tangent there.
No, Steven, you brought up some great points with Jackie and with Yord. Yord got me. Yord's death, that I had a feeling he wasn't going to make it, but I wasn't expecting it to be like that graphic. You know what I mean? And so for him to go down, I was okay. He's toast. I really thought Yord, Jackie, and oh God, you guys are gonna give me crap. I can't think of his
Soul?
name right now. Yes, thank you, Soul. I really thought they were gonna make it out. I thought those were the 3. I thought everybody else was, like you guys said, red shirts. I thought they were on the sacrificial block to be taken out. And honestly, it was very, when you look at the tone of that, like these red shirts coming in, I know people love, Master 10, and I know people love Eth Koth, but they were basically the red shirt. And I'll even say it, Kit Fisto were the red shirts of the Jedi going in to arrest Palpatine. When they walked in, I knew those 3 were not going to survive that fight. I didn't know they were going to go out in like 4.5 seconds, but I knew they weren't going to make it out. And so I knew there was going to be casualties in this, but I wasn't expecting just like scorched earth on the Jedi. I'm not surprised they did it, but I wasn't expecting it. With Jackie, that one kind of got me a little bit, because I was starting to get emotionally attached to her a little bit more throughout the few episodes we saw her in. And seeing her fight, had she survived that fight, she'd have gotten knighthood. Like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Had she survived that, she'd have been knighted. She was fighting that choreography. That was Daphne Keene, right? She pulled out like the mini Logan stuff. She brought that fighting stuff back from Logan, and it was an awesome fight. She was the highlight of that fight. I'll say, and I loved it. I really liked, like you said, Steven, the reveal, even though it was very predictable who the Sith was. The way they revealed it, I think it worked really well. He definitely switched personalities very quickly, which I did like. You could definitely tell that the first one after that, I mean, you could already tell. I could, but you could really tell the first one was a mask to this after you see, the Sith side of him. I liked the way they did him. I liked the way they even dropped the word Sith. You Jedi might call me Sith, something like that. And one of the things that really made me hate, like I love him, I like him as a character, but one of the things that made me hate him as a villain, which is a good thing, you want to hate your villains, but one of the things that made me hate him so much more was after he killed Jackie, and Soul calls out to her, Jackie, and he's like, "Well, was that its name?" And like just it refers to her as an it, and then you're the one that brought her here, and everything that he's told Osha, in episode 6 and everything, for some reason, I'm clinging to everything he's saying, because he's not wrong when he's talking to Osha about the way that she's been treated by the Jedi and everything like that. But we can talk about that episode here in a minute. But this fight, bringing Cortosis in. Now, I had forgotten that Cortosis had been mentioned in canon before in A New Dawn. And I think in one of the Thrawn novels, I think it had been mentioned also. JG is the one that brought that to my attention. I had forgotten that it had been mentioned. I was thinking that was when they brought it in, but it was nice seeing it in live action for the first time. It's a big part of one of my favorite Star Wars games ever, Jedi Outcast. That was a huge part of that game. Kyle Katarn, fighting Desan, who's building shadow troopers out of Cortosis. That was so cool to see it. And the effect that it had. I want to talk about like how big of a mind screw that would be for the Jedi. These Jedi, remember the Sith have been extinct for like 900 years, extinct, right? Quote unquote. They thought the Sith were gone. They hadn't even seen a red lightsaber. They'd never even heard of a red lightsaber. And the only training they ever had with sabers was sparring with each other, and they'd never really had a lightsaber battle proper with an actual enemy for their life. And so going into a battle like that, first off, going up against one guy, 8 or 9 of you going up against one guy, and he's holding his own, would be enough to screw with anybody psychologically going into it. But then to have him headbutt your lightsaber and shut it off has got to be one of the most, I think I put on Twitter, it had to be it just had to screw with their minds so bad, if they look down and like, wait, what? And to see that on live action was just really cool. Steven, what did you think of the Cortosis? Did you think it was a nice addition to the fight? To me, it adds this unique touch to this Sith Lord. But I mean, what are your thoughts on the Cortosis?
Yeah, Cortosis was completely brand new to me. I've honestly admitted before that I really didn't dive into Legends. I only really started with the canon when it restarted. So I kind of forgot that it wasn't canon 2 until JG brought that up. So Cortosis is a brand new concept to me. I've definitely gone down that rabbit hole a little bit more. I do want to kind of follow up on your question though, Brian and Nick, get your thoughts too. We keep saying, he's Sith. And is there, we've heard and we've looked at, they've played Kylo Ren's theme. Like, do you think we're going to get to the end of next week's episode and find out, no, we haven't actually met a Sith yet? Is there any chance that he is still more like something of like a precursor to the Knights of Ren and not necessarily Sith? Is he a dark side user? Are they waiting for the Sith? Can we just talk about that for a second? Do you think what percent or what bet would you make that he is Sith or not next week?
Nick, you want to go first?
Now, again, when it got announced, and JG has said, well, it's more of a mystery about a dark side user, but that's what got the official press release, I guess. But I seem to recall that Kathy Kennedy essentially said, we're going to get a point of view from Star Wars from the dark side, specifically the Sith, in the run up to the prequels. So I was like, okay. And that's why me and Yusuf got kind of excited about it. If he's a duck, if he acts like a duck, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, he's a duck. Okay. So he's a Sith, plain and simple. Brian, he can call himself whatever he wants. He can call himself, a disciple of the flying spaghetti monster or the founder of the Knights of Ren, whatever he wants. But he's a Sith, plain and simple. I don't know. Like, there is so much they need to wrap up in the season for this season. And I don't think they can do it in one episode. And that's just my opinion. I understand we're supposed to get one more character showing up. Whoever that is, maybe that's the actual Sith Lord and not the apprentice. But I don't know. Brian, what do you think?
Did you guys ever watch the 2D Clone Wars series on Cartoon Network?
Yes.
Nick never did. Okay, so the way Asajj Ventress was introduced into that series was she was fighting in an arena. She was a former Jedi. She had 2 lightsabers, one red, one green, and was basically fighting. Count Dooku came to find like a new apprentice, like his own acolyte and assassin, and he watched Asajj Ventress fight these guys and just basically mop the floor with them. And when he asked her, "What are you?" she said, "I am Sith." She didn't make her a Sith. Just because she said I am Sith, she didn't realize she was face to face with one. I think what's going to happen is this is 100 years before Phantom Menace, or is it 100 years before A New Hope?
It's said a century before or 100 years before the Empire, right? Or the
right. So that would be
I'm trying to think the crawl, but so I think they're playing a little loosely. I don't think it's like exactly 100 years.
Right.
I think we're saying about what is a Phantom Menace? I think like 32 years before A New Hope, right?
31 before, yeah.
So I think they're playing rough, or they're playing loose with that term, a century, I think.
See, if you look at the timelines book, if you guys have the timelines book, first off, that's an awesome reference book to have. I'm not big on reference books, and I love that one.
It needs updated though, like every other year.
Yeah, and it's going to be freaking ridiculous trying to compile all of that together. But if you look at that book, it says that Sheev Palpatine was like in his late 50s, I think, during episode 1. And so if this is 70 years before episode 1, even if it's 100 years before episode 1, you could drop a Plagueis at some point, a young Plagueis coming out of nowhere, because it doesn't say how old Plagueis was, how long he lived, how old he was when he was training Palpatine, you know. So, I mean, the time you could do it in a way and get away with it. And so I'm expecting a real Sith Lord, whether it's what's the other one what was Plagueis's master, Tenebris, or how do you say his name? Tenebris. Either he's
I would have to look it up. But
I know he was a Bith. I knew that in Legends he was a Bith.
Yeah. And I actually pulled up the opening crawl for the Acolyte, and it says 100 years before the rise of the Empire.
So it's 100 years
before 118, 119 years.
So, oh God. So that means, that's what that would be, about 120 years BBY then, technically. So that means what, 80 years before Phantom Menace? No, 90 years before Phantom Menace, something like that. 80 lady. Anyway, I think one of the proper Sith are going to show up and be like, you think you're a Sith? That's cute. And done. And it's going to be the introduction of the actual Sith. Because I mean, you read these High Republic novels. I know, Steven, you're reading High Republic. We're all caught up on all of that. They don't mention Sith anywhere in this entire period. And they're out there somewhere. They're watching all these events happen to the Jedi. They're watching Starlight Beacon go down. They're watching the Nihil do the occlusion zone. They're watching all of this happen, and they're still staying in the shadows. So the Sith are out there somewhere, and I'm expecting them to, like, this is going to be the big kind of reveal that they're still there. Not necessarily to the Jedi. Remember, the Jedi didn't know that they were still out there come episode 1. But I don't think he's actually a Sith. I think he thinks he's a Sith. I think he wants to be a Sith. I think he's very much along the lines of what that Asajj Ventress was in the 2D Clone Wars. I think that's kind of along the lines of that. Because you don't have to be a Sith to pour your anger into a kyber crystal and bleed it, and, to get the red blade and everything. We saw it in Jedi Survivor. It was just what they called, this is going to tick Nick off, I know it is, a dark Jedi is basically what he was. He was an evil Force user, but he wasn't a Sith. Asajj Ventress was never actually considered a Sith, so I don't think he is a Sith proper. I think he thinks he is. Do you guys think?
I keep going back to that idea. You don't use the theme for Kylo Ren in a show that takes place almost 200 years before Kylo Ren, unless you have a reason to use that theme, right?
Right. And I picked up on that quick. As soon as they started to play, I was like, is that Kylo's theme? And that, it was very prominent. And so I think this is going to be, did we ever get a history on the Knights of Ren, where they came from? I know that they were started by a guy named Ren, right? I mean, that's where the Knights of Ren, and their leader carried a red lightsaber, but did we ever get a proper history on them?
There was a Kylo Ren, I think 5-issue run for Marvel, and 4-issue run where he ends up showing how he takes on the mantle and then killed the Knights of Ren, right? And the original guy's name was Ren.
He killed the leader.
And that's what I was thinking, because he showed up again, I think, in War of Bounty Hunters, or another crossover between 4 and 5, or 5 and 6. And I think maybe I talked to you, or maybe it was JG, and I said, well, if that was Ren during the original trilogy era, that wouldn't make sense that we're seeing the origins of Ren now. And I think JG sent me a screenshot of a comic strip, I don't know where it was, where basically Ren said that he had taken on the name Ren. So it's almost like it's been passed down too. And
right.
How are we going to remember one comic strip? So that's a way to get out of jail free card for them if they want to use that.
Right. Because we don't have a last name on this guy yet. I mean, and here's the thing too. If they're going to do the history of the Knights of Ren, right? They can't be Sith. The guy that started it can't be a Sith Lord. Maybe the Sith Lord, maybe he is the acolyte to the Sith. Maybe it's not, May at all. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe it's actually, like when Rise of Skywalker came out, we thought Skywalker was going to be like, the Rise of Skywalker. We didn't really know how that was going to go. It turned out it was Ben Solo at the end of it. It wasn't Rey. I mean, I guess it was Rey, at the end or whatever. But I attribute the Rise of Skywalker being Ben Solo, since he was the Skywalker, and I know they meant to do it for Rey Skywalker, but that name, Disney likes just to have people adopt names. So why couldn't this guy be the Acolyte and take on the name Ren and start this tradition going down? His armor looks like it. Why would, like Steven said, why would you play the Kylo Ren theme for a Sith Lord? You know what I mean? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me.
And Brian, are you caught up on the High Republic right now?
I haven't read Temptation of the Force yet.
Okay,
but
the one beforehand, the young adult with Vernestra Rowe, right?
Defy the Storm.
Yeah, Defy the Storm. Remember her Vernestra's Padawan Emery shows up, right?
Yes.
And if you remember back to Phase 1, her Padawan in one of the very first books, Emery Cantos, he kind of dabbled in the dark side a little bit, right?
He did. Yeah.
Now, Chimere, again, we don't know his last name. We don't know much about him. He has basically said, he's older than he looks, is what we're getting that idea of. He's talking about how he used to train as a Jedi. He has this scar on his back that looks, again, like it could have been the same episode we saw Vernestra throw her. I mean, is there any way? I think that's way too much of a deep cut, especially for people that don't read all the High Republic stuff, to maybe make him connect back to like her original Padawan. I'm just saying, like, I think there's so much more to his story, and I don't know if we get it in a 35-minute episode on Tuesday or if we get it in a book or comic. Like, does he connect to anything else that we've heard of, or what else or are we going to learn about him and where, basically, is what I'm asking. What do you think, Nick? Like, you don't know anything about Vernestra's backstory or her Padawan. So, like, if they threw something like that in, that would be confusing to a lot of, I would say probably 85%, 90% of the audience, right?
So I started dabbling back into the High Republic last year. And I know Phase 1 sort of took place during the middle, and then Phase 2 went back to the beginning.
Right.
And I actually was like, this makes no sense. I'm going to Phase 1. I'm going to Phase 1. Not Phase 1. I'm going to Phase 2. I'm going to start at the beginning because I don't like doing the whole Yoda thing. I want to start at the beginning, go chronologically, and do it that way. I think for your deep dive, hardcore passionate Star Wars fans that will read every book or listen to every book. I, at one point in time, was a hardcore passionate Star Wars fan. I read every single, what is the equivalent of Legends books out there. I don't have the time anymore to do that. Am I going to be upset if Chimere, which is the Sith or whatever he wants, or a founder of Ren or whatever, if he was Vanessa Rowe's original Padawan? Hey, cool. If that's a callback and that can get people who actually do read those books, awesome, to be like, oh my God, that's awesome. I'm all for that. But like I've mentioned, that I have had issues with other things we've liked, like the MCU. If you get too big and you're trying to connect everything, which I'm all for, but if you get to a point where if I have to go back and read a book to understand what's going on, you're going to lose me. So, Brian, what do you think about that?
I don't disagree with you. I don't think it would be that big of a deal. You find out from the beginning of, this series, before we even get the rest of the story, that, Osha used to be Soul's former apprentice, and so that we knew there was a backstory there. We didn't necessarily know that story at the get-go. We've learned it as we're learning it, I should say, as we go. I could see them connecting something back to Vernestra. I don't know if he's as old as that, because how much time has passed since Phase 3 to this? 100 years? 50 years? Something like that? 100?
Yeah, I think it's been another 100 years, because Vernestra's in her mid-hundreds at this point, yeah.
Right. She looks good for her age, just saying. But for somebody being knighted at 15, and that's the other thing too. Like, I feel like that kind of took away from Vernestra a little bit. I'm going to go off on a tangent for a second. In the High Republic novels, Vernestra was the youngest Jedi to ever be knighted at 15. And if she's living that long, that doesn't really mean anything now, since like 15 for her. I guess maybe, or am I thinking of it the wrong way? Would that be a bigger deal if she was only 15 then? Or I don't,
because she was one of the youngest Padawans to ever be knighted, right?
Right. She was. Yeah. She was.
So I think that's the big takeaway is no other Padawan had ever reached knighthood that early. And I don't know if they do later on or not, but I think being able to claim that she was able to get it in 15 years versus other Padawans that take much longer, like Obi-Wan took how long till he was in his 20s probably.
Oh yeah, 25. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I could see him popping up. They made it a point to show the scar, so I'm sure we're gonna get a story on the scar. And it looked like it could be from a lightsaber whip. It does. It looks like it's got the like the lash kind of, when they say 25 lashings or whatever. That's what it looks like, is whip lashes. So maybe I think I'm not a huge fan of Vernestra in the series. I know it's been 100 years and she's older, but to me, it just seems like completely different character from what she was in the books to now. I know it's 100 years difference. I know. And I'm trying to wrap my brain around it, but it's hard to realize that that's the same character. I want that story though. If that's the case, I want to know everything about that. You have to wrap that up in this episode. If you're going to reveal that in the last episode, that he is her apprentice, you have to wrap that entire story up in that episode. There's no leaving. In the event you're not going to get another season, you have to tell that story, at least enough of it to satisfy most. If you want to build on it later with a novel or with a comic, go for it. But you need the trunk of that tree there more than anything of what happened. I wouldn't be against it. I don't know though. Maybe you might be onto something, because I hadn't thought of that at all. And Vernestra did seem to kind of think she was holding something back when she was talking about, something darker, something stronger, when they were saying, who killed Kalnaka, who killed all these Jedi. I don't think she was completely upfront with everything she was thinking.
And I just think it's too much of a deep cut. I'd be okay with it, but I think Leslie Headland wanted a blank canvas when she started this. Yeah. So if the story group or whoever's telling her connect it back to a book that came out 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know if they would go that far, because then again, I feel like you're going to alienate. Am I wrong in saying that 95% of the people that are watching maybe lower than that, but about 90% of the people watching Acolyte have not really picked up the High Republic books? Wouldn't you say it's mostly watchers, right?
I'd say that's fair. Yeah,
I would say bare minimum 95. And I think the issue that Star Wars is having, and we can delve into that here in a little bit, but I think especially Star Wars and then the MCU for a little while was everything like the story group. If you're going to give, is the story group still in charge of all these everything that's being brought? Because I haven't heard anything about the story group in a couple of years.
Minute. Yeah.
So did that get dissolved?
Mm-hmm.
I think Filoni has probably some more say, an overarching executive producer role, from what my understanding is. I think the story group is still existent. Now, I think they try to keep canon. Their main goal is to keep canon, I think, in line without having too many inconsistencies. But again, I'm just speculating. I have no idea how much they actually do or how much work goes into that right now. What do you think, Brian?
I have no idea. I follow Pablo Hidalgo on Twitter, but I haven't seen a whole lot, as far as story group canon. And the other thing is, when you look at the sequel films, they mention Lucasfilm Story Group in the credits, and nothing has that anymore. If you go back,
do the Marvel comics still have that?
I
have to look.
Know, actually.
They used to, but I don't. I kind of skipped that first page real quick.
Yeah, and I can look real quick. I got a whole stack of them right here. What is this? This is High Republic Shadows of Starlight #4. I can look. Where was it in the first cover? You said?
Usually, I think on the first page, because I do mine on the Kindle, it'll tell like the writers and the artists, and at the bottom it used to
Yeah.
say
Lucasfilm Story Group, Matt Martin, Pablo Hidalgo, and Emily. I'm not even going to try to say her last name. Sorry, Emily, but I cannot pronounce that last name. But yeah, it's mentioned in there still.
so.
You're
Like
right.
3 of them looked over that issue just to make sure there were no inconsistencies.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. Okay, good call. I don't know. I think I think Dave Filoni is way busier than we think he is at this point. I think with he's talking about doing an Ahsoka season 2. He wants to. He's got his movie coming up that he's slated to direct. He's advising every other project on what makes sense, which I'm totally for. I'm totally for that, him in that position. And what sold me on it was one of the gallery episodes for Mandalorian, when he sat down and just described how the Duel of the Fates connected all the way to Return of the Jedi. That whole thing that sold me on him being in charge of lore for Star Wars completely. That's what sold me on it. So I think he's way busier than even we think he is. But the only thing we've had mentioned in the series so far that ties back to the books is there was a mention of the hyperspace disaster. That was the only thing, because the planet they were on where they found Osha and May was affected by the great hyperspace disaster from Light of the Jedi. And so it wiped out like all life on the planet. And then this Vergence in the Force happens and life starts again on the planet. So that's the only connection. And I think that one was done right. Just mentioning it, there's a story there. Cool. Go read the books if you want the story. You don't even have to know about the story. You just know, oh, there was a hyperspace disaster. That sounds terrible, So that was the only mention so far. I don't know. Nick, what do you like? As somebody who hasn't read the High Republic, are you going to be upset if this turns into a thing where you have to have read the books? At least the ones with Vernestra, like you have to know the whole story of Vernestra to understand what's going on.
I will put it to you this way. If it gets to the point where I feel like I have to read the books to follow the show, I'm going to check out on the show. Where I will say they've done the writing, especially in episodes 6 and 7, have greatly improved. And I feel more invested in the characters. You mentioned the hyperspace disaster in episode 7, about what happened, and it was mentioned in the books. You can make callbacks to a book or to another piece of media in Star Wars and not have to watch or read that source of media. And I think for Star Wars, until we start getting until they bring it back to the theatrical releases, the TV shows are what we're getting right now. So that should be your baseline, and like that should be your foundation. And whether it's the Acolyte, Mandalorian, or anything else, and then every show, like case in point, that since we're in the High Republic right now, you can mention stuff that's going on, and then because there's enough stuff out there, you can go back. The hardcore fans would be like, "Hey, I'm going to go back and read it." What did Obi-Wan tell Luke in A New Hope?
I was getting ready to say that.
1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights have been guardians of peace and justice throughout the
and about the Clone
galaxy.
Wars.
Yeah.
When Luke's just like, you fought in the Clone Wars? And that's just kind of this throwaway line from A New Hope that there's a whole series and a whole like war they got fought that you just kind of brushed over.
And we got almost 20 years of
Clone Wars
shows
content.
and movies and everything because of it. So
yeah, just because of one throwaway line. I love the meme too of Luke asking Obi-Wan, "You fought in the Clone Wars?" And Obi-Wan's like, "Luke, I started the Clone Wars and then I finished them." Like, I love that. I love that. It's so funny. But I want to get into this this graphic, I guess you could say. Screen Rant put out an article talking about some things that they think are legitimately wrong with this show. And we can rapid fire through these real quick. I want to start at the bottom and work our way up. And I want to get your guys' opinions on these 10 things real quick. Before we call it a night. The first thing, or I should say the last thing on their list, the bottom of the list, one of the real problems they think that ACOLYTE has is it should be set further back in the High Republic era. Steven, as somebody who has read the books and has gone back, 300 years in High Republic history, do you agree with that? Or I mean, do you think it could work further back? Do you think that's necessary? What are your thoughts on that?
I think Nick kind of hit the nail on the head a few minutes ago when he said, like, if this interests you to learn more about these little references, you have literally dozens of books of all age ranges. You have probably over 100 comics at this point you can go back to. So I feel like that era, whether we're talking about like phase 1, 2, and 3, that again spans 200 some years, you have so many stories there. And I hope that they even continue it and do pop in and do some more stories after phase 3 wraps up next year. I'm fine with where it's at. I think I like that we're getting closer and kind of getting that feel for, like, we're seeing some of the flaws in the Jedi that we're going to talk about. And that's going to get us closer to the Phantom Menace, because this is where the show is based. I feel like if we go further back to the High Republic, which is like considered to be like the Camelot era of the Jedi, we wouldn't see the flaws of Sol. We wouldn't see the flaws of Kalneka. Like, this mystery wouldn't exist because those Jedi, for the most part, were not as flawed as the Jedi of this era and leading into the prequels. What do you guys think?
I agree with you. I think it works perfectly where it's at, because building off what Nick said earlier, if this show was set further back during the time of the books, then there'd be so many connections and references to things going on that nobody, that 90% of the people who haven't read the books would have no idea what they're talking about. They wouldn't know who the Nihil are. They wouldn't know Martian Row. They wouldn't know all these, Starlight Beacon going down. They wouldn't, about the path of the open hand and the closed fist. They wouldn't know about all this stuff. They'd be completely lost in the sauce, and they'd be like, what's going on? I think with where it's set at, it allows people, no offense, Nick, I'm not meaning like people like Nick, but like people like Nick who haven't read the
Get
books.
off my lawn.
The people like Nick who haven't read the books, they can still understand what's going on. Like you said earlier, Stephen, Leslie Headland has much more freedom to tell the story she wants to tell, with it being set where it's at. If you were in the middle of all these novels and comics and everything, you'd have so much stuff you'd have to be keeping track of to try to tell this story and making it still work with everything else. I think it would have gotten too messy. So I agree. And I know, based off of what Nick has said so far tonight, Nick, you agree with this? It needs to be set right where it's at instead of further back.
Part of the reason why I was super excited for the show is it was far enough back where it was new characters, a new era of Star Wars, but you were close enough to what everybody knew where you could bring in a Master Yoda. I'll be honest, I still want to see Master Yoda at the end of episode 8. I know Leslie Headland said we're not getting him. I think that might be a ruse. I don't know. We got Ki-Adi-Mundi in there, and for every Star Wars fan that
I knew
fucking bashed, Wikipedia and whoever else because they changed the age date of Ki-Adi-Mundi. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck whatever horse you came out on. Fuck you. Sorry, I got very heated. My apologies. Because I'm going to say this. They changed a beloved character in Legends to bring said character into canon in Grand Admiral Thrawn. So I like the idea of where the Acolyte's at.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Number 9 on their list was the show may make the Jedi irredeemable. I'm at a point, me personally, they're already irredeemable by the time you hit the prequels. Mace Windu was a dick to Anakin. He was an absolute dick to the guy that was supposed to bring balance to the Force, supposedly. I I think Luke summed it up great in The Last Jedi. You know, they fell because of their hubris, because of, you know, their arrogance. And they even talk about it in episode 2, how Yoda is talking about how, you know, more Jedi are so sure of themselves. The arrogance is there. It was really a problem. And I will die on this hill. The Jedi had it coming in episode 3. They had it coming. After everything they've done, everything they've kept secret, you know, and everything, they had it coming. So this show isn't making the Jedi irredeemable, in my opinion. I think the Jedi already were. I think episodes 1, 2, and 3 did that of the films. I think Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith did it. Am I off my rocker?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Because, okay, case in point, in episode 6, where Osha is with, I'm going to butcher it, Kaimar. Am I right on that, his name, or Kimar, whatever? Mr. Half-naked Sith guy.
Oh yeah.
He was telling his point of view of why the Jedi are where they're at. What did Obi-Wan tell Luke after Yoda died? When Luke told Obi-Wan, "Why didn't you tell me? You told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father." And Obi-Wan said, "What I told you was true from a certain point of view." What did episode 7 have? You know, because Indara was like, "You know what? This child just lost everything because we interfered. So we're going to tell her what happened. And it's going to be true from a certain point of view." I don't think the Jedi are irredeemable. I think they are stretching the truth. And that is what got them in trouble in the prequels. And that's why Anakin fell to the dark side. And that is why the whole idea, the whole thing where Palpatine was talking to Anakin in the Opera House about, you know, Darth Plagueis and everything, that is some of the best storytelling Star Wars has ever done.
And I kind of think about this idea that, you know, we're seeing a small group of Jedi, right? There are thousands of Jedi at this point. Like, think about any profession. I'm a teacher. Are there teachers that are corrupt and do bad things? Yes, you could say that for any job, right? So we're seeing a small group, this foursome that basically was on this planet at the wrong place, wrong time, and they had to make this lie up to cover it up. Like, we're seeing the cracks in the armor, right? If the Jedi, again, are coming from this age of Camelot, this golden age where they're at the height of their power, no matter what, you know, ancient civilization we talk about, whenever they hit the height of their power, it's only downhill from there. And so if phase 3 of the High Republic was the end of that, because they saw, whether it's through the Nameless, whether it's through Marchion Ro and the Nile, their armor is basically cracked to the point that by the time Palpatine can completely corrupt it 150 years later, that's when they can really explode from the inside. So like, the Sith are watching this, like you said, Brian, from the outside. They're seeing the Jedi starting to make these little mistakes, little actions. And it's not like all 100% of the Jedi are doing this, but even if you have a small group here doing it and a small group here doing it, it's going to hurt the whole Jedi overall until
Right.
Palpatine and the Sith can now jump in and follow through with their plan that they've been planning for over 1,000 years.
Yeah. No, I totally get where you're coming from on that. All right, well, let's go. I think you're absolutely right on that, actually, because we're starting to, even in some of the High Republic novels, we're seeing some of that cracks in the armor starting to come through and everything. So at this point, we're really getting to that point where it's really getting, you know, when Vernestra's like, "No, we're not telling the council this. We are not talking about this to the council." Yep. That was kind of like the beginning of the end for her and for this series, I think, and for all of this going south. So I think it is showing it. Number 8 is characters are dying too quickly. Do we think the characters are dying too quickly in the show?
I think like Nick or Brian, you and I think we both said how we were maybe a little bit more invested into like Jackie and Horde, and we kind of like, again, we're shocked by how brutal the deaths were because we're not used to seeing those types of deaths maybe in, again, Star Wars, like Lucas said, it was always designed for, children going into young adulthood. And so to see the brutality of it, I mean, and I want to see, especially from Nick's point of view too, he brought it up earlier, like Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, like none of those characters were really safe. They didn't have that plot armor. And so again, I was on the same camp as you, Brian. I thought Soul, Jackie, and Horde were going to make it out of episode 5, and only one of those 3 did. And like, we're killing off these series regulars. So like, I'm okay with it, because I guess in most other shows, like, I hate to say it, like Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan, Vader, Leia, Luke, Beru, Owen, they're all safe, right? In Andor, Andor's safe. Again, some of those side characters, we don't know what could happen in season 2. I like the fact that I'm going into each episode and I'm kind of surprised in the fact that I don't know who's going to be safe at the end of this. I don't know who's going to survive season 1. They could wipe out the rest of the characters. They could keep some alive, bring in some new fresh blood if they do a season 2. So I'm okay with this. I don't think they're dying too quickly. I mean, I would have liked to have gotten to know some of them more. Like, I was very upset when Kalnaka was dead really before we even got to meet him. Luckily, we got some flashbacks with him, and I know he has a comic book coming up. But I guess I go back and forth. I think some of them are dying too quickly, but I also like the element of surprise, and there's less plot armor for these characters. What do you think, Nick and Brian?
It's a running theme in the High Republic of characters just dying way too fast. I no longer get attached to any Jedi in the High Republic when I read a new book, when their new Jedi is introduced. Every single time I've gotten the new favorite Jedi, dead. By the next book, they're dead. Loden Greatstorm right off the rip. I met Loden Greatstorm. I loved him. I loved Loden. He was so awesome. I was like, dude, this guy is going to carry this freaking phase. He's awesome. I'm going to love him. And then 3 books later, wrong, like dead. And then, you get into phase 2 and you start to meet a whole nother group of Jedi. And you're like, oh, I like this guy. No, never mind. He's dead. Oh, I really like him. No, never mind. He's dead too. It's just over and over and over again. I thought Jackie was awesome, especially when she was fighting like a little beast with that lightsaber. No, never mind. You're a 3-hole punch. Like, she's gone too. And like, you don't get attached to anybody. The only one they've brought back, and this is a spoiler if you guys haven't read the High Republic. If you haven't read it at this point, I don't think you're going to. They kind of teased the death of Baryaga a little bit. He was a Wookiee in phase 1, a Wookiee Jedi Padawan. And they kind of teased his death during the fall of Starlight Beacon while he was fighting Raftars of all things. And it was one of those things, no body, no death, right? Like, you didn't see him dead, so he's not dead. And they kind of talked about this mystery of whether or not he was alive for a couple, not necessarily books, but short stories, comics, a couple mentions in the books. And then you come to find out he was hiding in a cave under the ocean. Like, he was still alive, and they brought him back, which that's the only one so far that they've brought back. And I was like, oh, he's awesome. So I think Baryaga is safe from here on out. They're not going to kill him again. But that's what I like about the High Republic series. And like what you're talking about, Steven, you don't know if these characters are going to make it or not. Like, the stakes are so high in all this High Republic stuff, because everything else is so far in the future, they're dead anyway, whether they survive this era or not. So I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think this series is in a perfect spot timeline wise, where you can do what you want with the characters. There's enough shocking deaths where you're like, okay, well, he's gone, and so I don't think they're dying too quickly. I think because of the structure of the show, with having the 2 flashback episodes, the 3rd episode, or what was it, the 4th episode was the flashback episode? No, the 3rd episode was, right? 3rd episode was a flashback, and the 2nd to the end is a flash. I think because of that structure, I don't think they're dying off too quickly. I think the story is getting told the way they want to tell it, depending on how this last episode goes. Nick, do you think that characters are getting killed off too quick in this?
No.
No?
It goes to 0.7. I think the episodes minus episode 7 are way too short, in my opinion. They're not dying off too quickly. You're not developing the characters for me to be invested in the characters. Like Yord, I'll tell you this right now. Was it a brutal death? Yes. He deserved it. And I was actually kind of glad he died. because he was just kind of a dick as soon as he walked in there in episode 1. And that's my opinion. I just don't think I know HBO has its own audience it's going towards, but when HBO, you get House of the Dragon season 2, and I don't know what their budget's at, but it's probably well over $200 million, and you have characters you are developing and you have a vested interest in, and then you have this other show in the ACOLYTE, which has $180 million, second and only budget for Star Wars, next to Andor. And I have no vested interest in the characters except for Sol, Osha, May, and Quaimar. Every other character, I don't have an interest in at all. It's like whenever they show up on the screen, it's like, well, here's 10 minutes or half the episode, which I do not care about.
No, bringing, like you said, bringing in 0.7, the episodes are too short. One of the things I thought was funny was episode 5 had the duel, right? The big duel. So it would have been episode 4. Episode 4 was 34 minutes long, and that's not counting credits, intro, recap. It's not counting any of that. It was 34 minutes. And I got on Twitter immediately after that episode aired. And the writer for the episode, one of the writers for that episode and 5, tweeted out the reason that episode was so short was so that the next episode could be longer and actually tell a better story. The next episode was 34 minutes long. It was the exact same length. And they're sitting here saying, well, that one was short, so the next one could be longer. No, they're both the same exact length, exact same to the minute. They're exactly the same. I think you're right. I think I was kind of surprised this week's episode was 44 minutes. Was it 44? I think it was 44 minutes this last week. I'm hoping for a longer finale. If Tuesday I get on Disney Plus at 8:00 and I pull it up and it says 34 minutes, I'm going to be disappointed. Because which one of you guys brought it up earlier? I think it was Steven, that or maybe it wasn't, maybe it was Nick, that there's so much in the show that they've got to wrap up. There's so many things that they've got. Was that you, Steven? They've got so much they've got to do. And I feel like there's still another big reveal coming later on, in this last episode. So it's got to be a longer episode. I do agree that the episodes are too short. Steven, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Disney Plus has this problem, and I don't know what it is about it, because they're streaming. It's the same as Netflix that has 2-hour-long Stranger Things episodes. It's the same, like Nick said, of Game of Thrones, House of Dragons, that can have episodes that are over an hour long to develop it. Disney Plus, whether it's for Marvel, whether it's for Star Wars, all of their episodes, for the most part, are shorter than I think I'd like them to be. And I mean, when you break this down, I think I'm going to bring this up again later in one of the other arguments. I mean, after you get rid of the credits, we're looking at, if you were to sit down and just binge it, we're looking at something that's going to take you under 4 hours. Like, that's almost the equivalent of a Lord of the Rings movie. If you're sitting down and kind of watching it at that, kind of mentality there, we're watching a very long movie, and we're not, in my opinion, a series should really be that idea that series is spreading out and you're getting your buck for your value for waiting that week in between episodes. So this is one I think all three of us agree with is correct, that the episodes are too short.
Yeah. And something else Nick brought up, I want to talk about too. The budget for each episode is like 180 million. I don't know about you guys, but I went and saw Godzilla -1, and that movie was made on a $90 million budget. Half of what one episode of this gets. Half.
15. It was a $15 million budget.
15 million. Okay. Still, like, it's ridiculous. That Godzilla looked intimately real. It was in the eyes. I'm telling you, if you guys haven't seen that movie, go look at Godzilla's eyes. It was intimately real. When he's chasing the boat and you know what I'm saying? When he's just locked on, it was just intimate. And that Godzilla just looked so great. And that whole movie had such a low budget. Where is it going with this show? Where is the budget at for this show? I mean, one of the other things we're going to talk about here in a minute, here in the next couple points, are the special effects. I don't think they hold up. I don't think we're getting $180 or $180 million special effects in this. There's no way. Especially in episode 7 when the speeder bikes were taking off in the woods, it looked so disjointed and so displaced. I don't see where it's at. I will say this though, and this might be like off the topic. I might be derailing here for a second, but I did see everybody was complaining about the lightsaber hilts in this, how they look so like big and bulky and how they look like torched on the end and stuff. I don't have a problem with it. I don't know what everybody's mad about. What, like, I don't get it. Like it's younger technology at that point. They haven't mastered on shrinking it down and making it smaller, right? And there are Nokia phones at this point. They don't have, Samsungs yet. That's the way it is. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there real quick too. But I don't know where the budget's going on these shows. I really don't. Point 6, moving up to number 1, is the hot Sith pattern is too much at this point. I think they're talking about between this Sith and Kylo Ren and everything that Disney's been doing with the Sith. Honestly, I think that one's a non-topic, but what do you guys think on the hot Sith topic?
I don't have a comment on this one. No.
Yeah, same. Nick, probably not.
Is this really a talking point?
That's one of the points on it. The hot Sith pattern is too much at this point. That's what
the Grumpy Jedi says. Let's move on and go to point 5.
Fair enough. Point 5, parallels are too on the nose. One of the things that I can't stand is twin switching, and they've done it like 3 times in this series already. We're not done with it yet. And if you're going to twin switch, great. But you can't twin switch when one of you has a giant white tattoo on your forehead the size of a hubcap. You can't twin switch. You know what I'm saying? Like, it makes Soul is looking May in the face on the ship. And I know her hair is like, but there's no way he's not seeing that. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no way. Am I wrong? Like, is it just a nitpick thing or
I read this one, number 5, differently than you, Brian. I read it as parallels, like almost to like the prequels, like some of the patterns. Yeah. And in my opinion, again, if I'm reading it that way, I'm kind of looking at it like how Lucas says, like, it's like poetry, it rhymes. Like, we're seeing, cause and effect. We're seeing some, patterns throughout this galaxy, this universe, this fantasy story. But the way you're describing it, yeah, I mean, we're seeing how you can't really keep mixing up the twins. And I have to give them credit. Like, in the marketing leading up to this, we had heard rumors it might be a twin thing, but they really kind of didn't advertise that, right? It was kind of you realize that in the first 5 minutes if you were like haven't been watching or following like the rumors about it, right?
Right. I see where you're coming from with the parallels thing. If we look at it from that point of view, I agree with you. It rhymes, it pays homage to what's come before, maybe a little bit of foreshadowing for something later on down the road, that we see in the prequels. But there's certain sins in this show that I think, I don't know. Those parallels are great, but to a lot of people, not necessarily us, but to a lot of people, some of those parallels are ruining what has come before, especially the parallels with like Anakin and the whole Force conception thing. I know a lot of people are upset because now they feel like Anakin isn't special anymore. Ki-Adi-Mundi could just be like, well, that's not the first virgins in the Force that I've seen in the last 100 years. There was another one. Maybe they were the chosen ones. Like I kind of see where they're coming from. But at the same time, wait for the last episode. Like I said earlier, maybe it's going to have something to do with that later. Maybe I'm just giving it too much credit, but I see where you're coming from. Nick, what do you think on the parallels?
Steve pretty much hit it on the head. That Lucas made 1, 2, and 3 to rhyme to 4, 5, and 6. And I think that's kind of where people had issues with the sequels. There really wasn't, especially, you could say 7 and 8 started to rhyme, and then 9 was just like, man, we're done. I see the rhyming in there. The Jedi hubris is calling to episode. I caught that right away. It's like, hey, it's going to what Luke said. So I like they're making those connections. I don't know. I feel this one, I feel this one is more of a nitpick than the last two have been more of a nitpick.
Yeah.
Like I feel like 7 should be at 5, and 5 and 6 should be down.
Let's see here. What about number 4? The final episodes are sure to feel rushed. I think we've kind of talked about that quite a bit in this one so far. I think we're kind of worried that it's going to be. Is that kind of the consensus at this point?
I feel episode 8 is going to be rushed.
Yeah.
Because they're bringing Soul's bringing Osha back to the council now.
Mm-hmm.
We have Kaimar and everything that's going on with May right now. And then I wouldn't be surprised if we had another flashback
During the
because
last episode.
Yes, because of the whole, they were talking about what happened with the council, what they're going to tell the council and everything. I feel 6 and 7 were not rushed. I felt that was actually some of the better storytelling we got in the Acolyte, where episodes 1 through 5 did feel rushed. But honestly, I don't think we're going to get an hour-long episode in the season finale of the Acolyte. I feel we're going to maybe get a 40 to 45-minute episode. And it wouldn't surprise me if we got a 30-minute episode. So that's, I guess that's kind of where I'm at. And I was chatting with JG earlier in the group chat, and it's like, earlier today, and I was just saying, given where we're at right now, I understand they're setting it up for a multiple season run. In the lead up to the series, I was actually kind of excited for it. Unless we get some sort of jaw-dropping season finale, I'll be honest, I don't want another season. I want them to put money elsewhere and, develop a story. I have said this again. I just want a good story. I feel all the ingredients were there for this series. I just don't feel like the cook that was in the kitchen made a good meal.
That's fair. I don't totally disagree with you. I definitely think you hit the nail on the head with the simile, with the metaphor, because that's a great, with the ingredients for something great are there. And I'm wondering, remember with Obi-Wan Kenobi, somebody did that like edit of like a 2.5 hour long edit of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series and took stuff out, made it a movie. And it was so good. It was so good the way they edited it. I feel like somebody's going to end up doing that with Acolyte and take a bunch of stuff out and tell the story. I don't know if they're going to tell it, chronologically or still do the flashback thing. I don't know, but I guarantee somebody's going to end up doing it. I feel like they're going to. Number 3, special effects have been disappointing. I definitely think there's been some shots where it hasn't been great. Torben's beard, when you see him in like the second episode, was totally glued on. You could see it. It looked horrible. You could tell it was a fake beard just right off the rip. You could see like the definitive line of the end of the hairs like on his cheek. It looks so bad. I feel like some of the attention to detail is lacking in some of these special effects. Steven, what do you think?
Am I wrong in saying they're using the volume less and more sets and on location?
I think you're right.
Okay, so like that, I like the volume for Mandalorian, but you can also sometimes kind of see where the reality ends. So yeah. I'm hit or miss. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. I mean, you mentioned, I think, Brian, earlier about the speeder bike sequence from episode 7, right? And I mean, I know, again, here we are in 2024, or when they filmed it last year in 2023. Is there any way that they maybe wanted it to look similar? Like if you go back and watch Return of the Jedi from 83, I mean, those bike speeders sequence, again, it doesn't hold up to what a modern day special effects look like, obviously, but is there any way that they maybe purposely made it look like that, or am I just pulling at strings here?
Maybe I mean, they might have. I feel like Return of the Jedi looked better than what that did. I feel like, like in the classic Star Wars movies, like once in a while you'd see like the special effects box around like the Death Star or something. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah, I feel like you could almost see that on these speeders as they were like taking off. I just feel like the CG just was not there. I feel like you could see the actual moment where it went from being like a real person sitting on a speeder bike to being CG, both of them being CG. I feel like you could see the exact frame where it switched and then they took off.
Would you rather have the speeder bike in episode 7 or the slow speeders on Tatooine from Book of Boba Fett?
Ooh, the Mos Espa Vespas.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That was so bad. The Power Ranger speeders.
Hmm.
Look, we're going to derail for a second. That was the worst speeder chase I've ever seen in my life. That was so slow.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, oh my God, why'd you bring that up? I completely forgot about that.
See, we could always make it worse than it is, right? We have to be.
No, it could have
trying to find the positive.
At least they were fast speeders. I'll give you
Yeah.
that. At least they were fast. No, that's a good point. Steve, Nick, we were talking about the budget for the shows. Do you think the special effects have been disappointing for this series so far?
Yes, plain and simple. Yes, you can tell in the Forest World, and by the way, those were my Padawan children and everything. They wanted to come by and say hi, and they were going to bed and everything. But the budget, I said before, if you're going to use practical effects, I'm all for that. If you're going to use all your money on special effects, I'm all for that. Just tell a good story. They haven't told a good story, and the special effects aren't helping either. One of the key things that a lot of people had issues with in the prequels was people said Lucas used too much CGI. If you actually go back and watch all the behind the scenes stuff, it wasn't really until very late in the prequels that Lucas actually used a lot of CGI. He actually used a lot of practical effects. I feel like the special effects they're using almost, I read somewhere, I read a meme somewhere, and it was talking about the Jedi Temple we saw. It looks like the Jedi Temple from the PlayStation 1 or the original Xbox. And honestly, I look at that and I'm like, I can't unsee that now.
I don't know if it's in the rendering and the shading or what, but I see where you're coming from on it. I don't, if you're going to, I'm at a point where I really want practical effects again. I feel like you said with episode 1 was way more practical effects than people realized. They thought that was a whole CGI fest. It wasn't. If you look at like my favorite practical effect in episode 1 is the Mos Espa pod race arena. When you see all the people in it, they're actually Q-tips with Sharpie on the end of them, just stuck down in chicken wire. I love that. You can't. That's what's one of my favorite things about movie making is this, art of illusion and the magic behind it, and how it's just a bunch of Q-tips, but to you, it's a crowd of people watching a pod race. I love stuff like that. Episode 1, when they got to episode 2, that's when Lucas really started. Was like, can we just do all of this in post? Like, he was just like, can we just do all of it in post, all of it? And then episode 3 was just almost ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, I don't see, like we were talking about the budget earlier. I don't see the budget in these episodes of these special effects. I feel like Mando and like we were talking about Andor earlier, I feel like the special effects really worked in those shows. Like that K2 droid in Andor was totally believable. It looked on par with like the Rogue One movie, the K2SO that we saw in that. I feel like it was on par. Like the special effects were there. Like they really put the time and effort into them to really polish them up. And I just don't feel like this show is polished. I think that's the best way I can describe it. I don't think it's polished is the issue.
And keep in mind too, remember for the original trilogy, like Lucas and what he was doing with ILM was groundbreaking, right?
Yeah.
When you see that, for us today, we watch the original A New Hope and we see the Star Destroyer and the Tantive 4 go across the screen. That's part of the reason why this film became, I mean, this whole saga became a thing, is because people had never seen anything like that. And so even with the prequels, like you said, it was mostly practical effects and Phantom Menace, but keep in mind, Jar Jar Binks, for the hate he gets, he was the very first ever computer generated character. Like, we're not going to get things like Lucas was always trying to break those barriers and like set things up. Like whenever he was testing things out in the 90s to get ready, that's what, Spielberg was, also doing the stuff with Jurassic Park. Like our digital, like Avatar today, is things that we see for granted digitally are not going to happen without Lucas breaking that barrier. And I think Disney really, and I'm hoping they're taking their time on this, because when the sequel trilogy came out, because today so many movie studios are using the greatest, the latest, greatest fad in technology. And, the prequels, when they came out in the early 2000s, they were still ahead of the curve. Well, I hope that Disney is spending the time to try to figure out, what are we going to do to make these new Star Wars movies be an experience that you need to pay and leave your house to go and see on the big screen, instead of just watching something like Mandalorian, Acolyte at home. And if people have been getting Mandalorian for, free, or just, $10 a month on Disney Plus, what's going to make them now go and pay $10 or more to go watch a 2-hour Mandalorian episode? And they need to figure out a way to kind of bring back what Lucas had started with, those groundbreaking visual effects. So I'm glad we brought this one up, because I think Star Wars has always been known for their special effects. And I hope that they, pick it up a little bit as we move into more Star Wars projects.
Yeah. I think one of the best examples of, even now, Disney is getting, I shouldn't say Disney, because it is still Lucasfilm. They just answer to somebody different now. Lucasfilm is still pushing that envelope with some of these special effects. Look at Luke Skywalker in Mandalorian. When we saw it was a little clunky, right? Well, let's start further back than that. Let's start at Tarkin and Leia in Rogue One. Right, when they were doing the CG faces on the different actors, it was kind of clunky, right? It was like, okay, I see what you're going for there. It's a little weird, but okay, we'll buy it. And then they got to Luke Skywalker and Mando, and it was still a little off. By the time they got to Luke in Book of Boba Fett, I'm hard pressed to find the CG in his face in Book. I feel like they really made a giant leap just from Mando to Book of Boba Fett. With the way he looked, and then with his voice and with all of it, to the point where if they are that good at it, I would not mind seeing a film, and we can talk about this in another episode at some point, with the original three again, with Han, Luke, and Leia again in it, and CG them. In Rise of Skywalker, it didn't really work that right, because it was like in the dark, and they had their lightsabers glowing on their faces, and it looked weird. But I feel like with Book of Boba Fett, that was the point where I think that was the feather in the hat, where they were like, we got it. We got it. We wanted to.
Lucasfilm proved for the first 30 minutes of the latest Indiana Jones film, you can make Harrison Ford look like he did. So
yes,
I think we went from like Tarkin to 10 or 3 minutes of Luke to 20 minutes of Luke in Book of Boba Fett to now like 30 to 40 minutes of young Harrison Ford. So you're right. Lucasfilm itself is continuing to push the barriers.
And just talking about the Indiana Jones thing for a second, that was my favorite part of that movie. The whole opening part was my favorite part of that. And it made me want an entire movie of just that. I would accept an entire movie of that. A young Harrison Ford again. You can do it. You can do it. You just proved you can do it. Do it. So I think, and that technology is only going to get better as we go, better and cheaper for them to do, and more available. And I think they're pushing the envelope with that technology. So if they can make Luke Skywalker look that good in Book of Boba Fett for 20 minutes, I don't know why they couldn't make that speeder look good for all of 5 seconds. I don't know why you know what I'm saying? Like, but then you turn around and you talk about Book of Boba Fett also, and there was a shot where it was like looking down on the city streets, and they didn't put a roof on one of the buildings, and you can see 2x4s inside holding the walls up. Like, you have stuff like that. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's just, it's so hit and miss, but they've proven they can do it. They've proven that they have got the technology to do it. So at this point, I don't see any excuse for some of the special effects in Acolyte to look the way they do. That's just me. That's just kind of where I'm at this point. So
I'm going to say this. this was supposed to be one of the tentpole franchises or tentpole series for Star Wars moving forward. And Disney bought Lucasfilm. I was going to say they bought Star Wars. They didn't buy Star Wars. They bought Lucasfilm. We all know they bought it because of Star Wars. But if you're going to buy Star Wars, and they bought it for $4 billion, they've made all their money back and then some. And for everybody saying, oh, somebody else should buy Star Wars, Disney is not going to let this IP go. The reason being is, yes, ACOLYTE's getting a lot of bad press. But guess what? Bad press is still good press because it's still churning money. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. They could have, Leslie Headland and the effects people could have gone to Leslie Headland, and they could have gone to Kathy Kennedy and said, hey, we need more money. Bob Iger is back in office. Bob Iger bought Star Wars. Bob Iger wants Star Wars back in the movie theaters. Bob Iger would have wrote an open check, plain and simple. So I'm in agreement with you. That's, I guess, my biggest, next to the next two we're coming up on, that's my biggest issue, is the effects just look awful. Like, honestly, I feel like I was watching Band of Brothers from 20 plus years ago, and that had better effects than this.
Yeah. I remember Band of Brothers. I remember that. No, you're right about that. All right, let's get into these last two before we call it a night. Number 2, the dialogue is superficial and falls flat. I think this is a problem. This is me personally. I think this was a problem that was in the first 4 episodes, maybe. I think 6 and 7 have really, like Nick said earlier, have really kind of ramped it up a little bit. I think they've gotten a lot better. But I think this was a big problem in the first half of the series. Steven, what do you think? Do you think, bad deliveries? Do you think it was delivered fine? I mean, is it the writing? What do you think on it?
A combination. I think it's still struggle personally. A lot of the May and OSHA conversations, I don't know if it's the acting or what it is. I think back to Andor and some of the acting there, Skarsgård's character. I was sitting on the edge of every word that he was saying. And again, that could have been the writing, that could have been the acting. I'm not sure, something about this. And maybe it makes me think about how there's some Star Wars, I do mostly do audio books, how there's some that I can't stop and I just have to keep listening to. And there's other ones, maybe they're more younger adult or younger readers that I take a lot longer to get through because it's just the dialogue, it's just not hitting the same level like Star Wars for me. So again, they don't all have to hit 100% for me because again, Star Wars is for all kinds of audience members. But yeah, this is one that I'm hitting or missing. I think you're right, Brian and Nick, that it's gotten better. It's still not my favorite dialogue and writing of any show. But what else do you guys think?
I definitely think some of the delivery in, what episode was it, 4, between May and the guy that ended up being the Sith, when they were kind of talking, walking down the mountainside and everything. I think it's not necessarily, it is the writing and it's the delivery, but it's not, those aren't the only two things I think are the perpetrators of this. I think choppy editing is part of it too. I think there's some weird edits in this show where you're just starting to get into it, and then you've been there for 30 seconds, and then all of a sudden it just cuts back to something else, and you're like, wait, okay, and then you got to keep up with what's going on in both sides, and I feel like it's just kind of choppy, and it just kind of switches scenes really without feeling like you're at the end of a scene. You feel like you're in the middle of a scene, and then it cuts to another one, and you're just like, okay, all right, and then you just kind of keep up with it. I think that has a lot to do with it too. That episode 4 when May and the Sith are, you don't realize he's a Sith yet, but when they're walking down the mountainside and they're going to find Kalnaka, that felt clunky when they were talking back and forth. You could tell that it was rehearsed dialogue. You could tell it was written and scripted. You know what I'm saying? Like, it had that scripted feel to it. So I think it's definitely gotten better with this last 2 episodes, especially this last episode. I think it's gotten really to the point where it's like, okay, this is what it all should have been. Nick, what are your thoughts? Here we go.
So I was sitting here and I was listening to you guys, and then I realized, man, maybe I am being that grumpy Jedi. And as I was sitting here listening to you, and I was listening to you, Brian, just talking about the editing and the dialogue, and then I go back to actually what Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and God rest her soul, Carrie Fisher talked about the dialogue in the original Star Wars in what George Lucas wrote. And they read it and like, no one in their right mind would talk like this. So they kind of adjusted the writing and everything, or not the writing. The actors would kind of read it and be like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about. Or they would have, or somebody would come in and rewrite the dialogue. But then what also made the original trilogies, and say what you want about the prequels and the overuse of, or the as we've learned later about the the practical effects of the prequels, the writing wasn't, the dialogue, especially in all three, especially the romantic dialogue between Padme and Anakin, was just god awful. I'm like, I can't believe I'm listening to this. And in reality, I feel like you said, it almost felt like it was just they literally read it right before they shot the thing.
It didn't feel
and there was
natural.
no there was no passion in it. And that to me, if I'm not asking for Shakespeare, and you know what, I'm not even asking for House of the Dragon or Lord of the Rings style writing. Just give me something that's believable. And for the vast majority of the series, it has not been believable or emotionally invested writing. And that's, again, part of the reason why I am not high on the show. Yeah, if they would have come out on Wednesday after the season finale and said, we're not doing a season 2, I'm not gonna be cheering and be like, yeah, I helped bring down. I'm like, no, because guess what? That means people are out of work. And there are people who are actually invested in this show and who actually enjoy the show, like JG. JG loves this show.
Mhm.
I honestly wish JG was on tonight because I would love to hear his point of view on all
And
this
Nick,
stuff.
your kids like it, right? Your son.
My son loves I don't think he's seen the 6th or 7th episode, but he's watched and he's actually enjoyed it. Like he even likes, for the most part, Rise of Skywalker. Like, and I guess that's kind of where I'm at right now. Maybe I am just getting to that point in my life where I should stop poo-pooing on other things. And Kevin Smith brought it up. He is a diehard Star Wars fan, and he almost died last year or a couple of years ago. And it's like, no one, I ain't gonna bash a show or bash a movie. I almost died. I almost had a stroke. Yeah, I think he had a stroke or a massive heart attack or whatever. So if somebody else enjoys it, let them enjoy it. And so that's why I am so, like, I ain't gonna bash anybody for enjoying this show. I'm really happy they're enjoying it. It's just not doing it for me. And like the MCU, maybe I've just grown out of Star Wars. I still have episodes 1 through 8. I still have, arguably, my honest opinion, the best single piece of Star Wars to come out since the originals is right back there, Rogue One. Best piece of Star Wars since the originals. So I don't know. Brian, what do you think?
I agree with you. I don't care if the dialogue is clunky, because episode 4, so all the way through that movie, it was technical jargon, and it was, especially for being in the 70s when people are introduced to this universe for the first time, and you're getting all this weird dialogue, and you're talking about all these planets and things that made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. Like who talks like that? Like who even knew what a parsec was going into that movie? And everybody's like, wait, okay, well, what's the Kessel Run? And so and then 40 years later we got a movie on the Kessel Run. But like I don't have a problem with clunky dialogue. I just want it to be, like you said, Nick, I want it to be delivered in a way where I believe that the characters are actually in the setting and are actually dealing with the situation that they're in, or actually, coping with everything that's going on around them, trying to figure this out. It just seems, it feels very unnatural. A lot of the dialogue does, and you can tell it's scripted. There's moments between characters where it's not believable. It just feels like feels like it was written by a fan who the dialogue was written by a fan and then delivered by fans with like a cell phone recording it. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of what it feels like sometimes. It feels fan filmish. So I agree with you. The clunky stuff doesn't bother me. I just want it to be delivered in a way that's believable. So and the last bit here before we get out of here is mysteries are dragging out for too long. Going into this show, when Kathleen Kennedy first announced this, she was talking about how it was going to be a mystery show, a murder mystery show, surrounding the Sith, and how the Sith were going to play a vital part in everything. And where my brain went, maybe this is just me, my brain went to, there's a Sith Lord killing people, killing Jedi or whoever, because when she first announced it, we didn't know it was going to be. Did we know it was going to be the High Republic? I don't think. She said it was going to be in the waning days of the High Republic, is what she had said. Which everybody was like Darth Plagueis leading into the prequels, and everything like that. And so I was thinking, the Jedi are going to start getting whiffs of maybe some activity that are leading to the Sith, right? That's kind of what I was thinking this was going to end up being on Coruscant, or Naboo, maybe even, since Palpatine is on Naboo, you know what I'm saying? And so I wasn't, this isn't really what I was expecting with this show. She really sold it as it was going to be surrounding the Sith. And so far we have one episode left and we've seen a Sith. Maybe we've seen a Sith twice for 2 episodes. Maybe we've seen a Sith. We don't even know yet. We have one episode left. As far as the mysteries dragging out, I feel like the flashback episode that we got for episode 7, maybe switch episodes 6 and 7 around. I feel like maybe that would have been the right way to go. Just switch those 2 around, because you can put the flashback episodes wherever you want. It doesn't matter. You can stick them wherever but I feel like switching those 2 around, I feel like the ending of 6 would have been a better like leave off point going into the finale with Osha, or with Osha putting the helmet on, everything like that. I feel like just switching those 2 around, it would have had more, what's the word I want to use? Credence, I guess you could say, to what, he was telling Osha on the planet, which looked a hell of a lot like Octu, but wasn't, I guess they came out and said it wasn't Octu. But I feel like you would have really been there with Osha at that point, knowing what had happened, knowing what she knew, and then hearing everything he's telling her. I feel like it would have really put you into Osha's shoes and made you understand why she decided to go put that Cortos's helmet on, at the end, instead of just being like, well, I don't get it yet, And so, what do you guys think? I mean, do you think the mysteries are taking too long? It's supposed to be a mystery series, so this is why I went back earlier and said I felt like maybe it should have only been 7 episodes long. Took one of them out, maybe condensed some of it down. What do you guys think?
I remember, I think it was week 3, and I think Nick, you said you're ready to fold on it, and you had a lot of questions, and I think it was me and JG in the chat saying to you hey, it's a mystery. Part of the reason is it wraps up on a cliffhanger is to keep people coming back. I personally enjoy the week to week model. And I also like that it's no longer at 3 a.m. that I have to wake up early and watch it to not get spoiled. I have to watch it right there at 9, or my Twitter will spoil it for me. I think about how if it was all dropped at once, I mean, we'd be done talking about it 8 weeks ago. if it's now this model, like I have a friend of mine who loves the binge model and he hasn't watched any of it yet, and he's going to binge it all, I guess, when it's done. And I don't know, I'd be curious to hear from him, his point of view, like how different it is for him. Like he's kind of avoided spoilers somehow for all these weeks, and he doesn't, I guess he's a big Star Wars fan, but he'd rather binge it all at once. And I wonder how that would play out. Cause like I said earlier, it's when all is said and done, when you take out the credits, it's going to be under 4 hours long. And again, if you watch the extended cut of Return of the Jedi, you're sitting there for almost 4 hours to get that one, big chapter of that story. And I wonder if it would play out longer. Like we're acting like it's taking us weeks to find out the answers, because it is, because we're watching it on a weekly format. But in the future, like my son who's growing up now and just only 2 years old, when he watches this years from now, he's going to be able to watch it probably in one, over a weekend. So it's going to be a different feel for future generations. I don't know. What do you think, Nick? I know you were the one that was really struggling at the beginning to kind of even stick with it because of the mysteries and the ideas there.
I guess my question is, what mysteries are they talking about? Because we found out who the acolyte was within 5 minutes of the show, within 15 minutes of the show. And, they wound up, and we found out they were fighting a Jedi in the teaser, in the trailers and everything. So what mysteries are they talking about? Are they talking about Vanessa Rowe? Because honestly, like JG said, like I am not a fan of her at all. I know for people who have read the novels, they were very high on her and they love her. And JG's like, now I'm very suspect of her. I'm not a fan of her just because it goes back to point two. Whenever she's on screen, there's no emotional interest. There's nothing in there. But the one thing I can say is, what is she hiding? That if there's one mystery in this entire show, I could care less about the dark side. It's like, what the hell is she hiding? That is my big issue. Now, if they're going to be like, oh, that's going to be the big thing for the season finale, cool. But then it goes back to my whole point earlier about you had all the ingredients for an amazing show, and the cook did not deliver. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Unless we get a banger of a season finale, I'll say it again. There 2 episodes out of 7 so far, or let's just say episode 8 is a banger. 3 episodes out of 8 does not justify a season 2 for me. You spent all that money, all that press. It just, to me, doesn't do that. I've been going on that for a while, y'all. I really wanted to like this show. I did. I was so looking forward to this show, and I knew so many people that start, like Steve, like you mentioned, you had a cousin that was bashing. I had people that I worked with. They're about the same age as me that, hate everything that's coming out with Star Wars right now. And I'm like, and I really wanted to love this show. Like last year I went to Galaxy's Edge with my fiance, and she got me and her went in and we built our own. We're going off on a tangent right now, I know, but I'm coming back to it, I promise. We went in and I built my own lightsaber, and it was one of the most enjoyable. I felt like 12-year-old Nick or 16, 17-year-old Nick, and he's getting ready to go watch episode 1 opening day. And guess what lightsaber hilt I got? I got a High Republic lightsaber hilt, because I was actually part of the reason I got my High Republic lightsaber hilt was, hey, ACOLYTE's coming out next year. I'm looking forward to it. And I'm disappointed in the show. There are things I love about the show. Soul, Kymar, Osha, May, kind of like those actors you can tell they put in the work, and I appreciate their work, but it's just so disappointing. That's all I gotta say.
I want to go back to what Steven said earlier about binging it, or watching it episodically like we are now, because right now we're watching it episodically. I mean, that's all anybody has watched so far, but I'm curious to hear his experience, Steven, when he binges it, because with High Republic Phase 2, I didn't read any Phase 2 until it was all out, and then I binged Phase 2 all the way through. And I thought it worked really well reading it that way. And matter of fact, there were stories in For Light and Life that took place before Phase 2 with like the Queen's Bloom, with Axel Greylark and everything like that. There were stories that happened there. I read those first, and then I sat down and I read the comics and the order they were supposed to go in between the books and everything. And that whole story made sense just sitting down and binging through it. One of the things I noticed reading Phase 1 of High Republic was, because it was a new era, new characters that we had, been introduced to, and in a new time period. When you had 6 months in between books, it was easy to kind of forget what had already come before with some of these characters, because you'd only had one outing with them so far, or two outings with them if you're, going between the young adult novels and stuff like that. Some of these characters, there's several months in between their stories, and it's kind of hard to kind of piece it all together when you sit down and binge all of it, right? I think, George Lucas always said Star Wars was meant to be watched chronologically or experienced chronologically. And so I think I'm excited to see what people who are just going to sit down and binge it think when they, actually sit down and go through all of it, even if it's only 4 hours long, to kind of see what that experience is. Because I'm getting to a point where I'm going to get to show my son the Star Wars movies for the first time. He's going to be 5 on Halloween, and he already watches like Young Jedi Adventures, the animated High Republic. He watches some of that. He always tells me that he likes Ghostbusters and Star Wars. Those are his two. He loves going to sleep watching Ghostbusters. I'm like, I'm training him right, guys. I'm working on it. I'm doing it the right way. But he says he likes Star Wars, and then he'll be like, I like Star Wars more, but me like Ghostbusters. I'm like, okay, cool. That's great. We'll watch Ghostbusters. And so I'm getting to the point where I'm going to get to see him watch Star Wars for the first time. And he's getting to watch it for the first time, and I'm going to get to watch him watch it for the first time. And I'm excited for it. When I met Kirsty, she had never sat down and watched Star Wars. And I think I messed up, and because I showed her, and when we got together, it was only 1 through 6 at the time. There was no 7, 8, 9 yet. This was early 2012. And we watched 1 through 6 in that order. And I feel like I messed up doing that. Maybe not. She told me afterwards, you watched them 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, right? And I said, yeah, that's the order they came out when I was a kid. And she said she wished she had watched it that way. So different people, have different preferences on binging it or watching it in a certain order and everything. I want to know, who'd you say it was? Just a friend of yours, or?
Yeah, my friend Aaron, and we've been Star Wars fans since we were in elementary school together. So he avoids spoilers, and I'll fill you in after I talk to him in a couple weeks.
Yes, absolutely. I want to hear what his experience was with it, because I like with Andor. We've been talking a lot about Andor tonight. I watched Andor when it first came out weekly, episodically, and I didn't feel like I liked the show, but I didn't feel like I got every detail. Recently, I sat down when I was sick. I was sick a couple months ago for like 2 weeks, and I sat down and I binged Andor season 1 again, just back to back all the way through. And I forgot how much I loved that series. I loved it so much more the second time than I did the first, being able to sit down and just go boom, 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 all the way through, and making it feel like one continuous story instead of broken up into chapters. So I do want to hear what his experience is with it. So let me know whenever you hear from him what that is. So guys, we've been going for almost 2 hours. Geez, I didn't expect to go that long tonight. Do you guys want to add anything else before we wrap it up for the evening?
I guess I want to ask any predictions or any last minute thoughts about what you want or hope to see in Tuesday's finale.
I'm even though Leslie Headland said it's not happening, I'm hoping for the Yoda cameo. You can't keep talking about the high council without somebody popping up from the High Council. So I'm hoping for a Yoda cameo, and I'm really hoping that we get the big bad Sith. I don't even care if it's Plagueis, Tenebris, or I don't care which one it is. I just want a big Sith to pop up in this and just be like, you think you're hot, you think you're awesome, you think you're a bad boy, let's go. So what about you, Nick?
I think we'll get about a 40-minute pre-recap from start to the end of the to when the credits roll. We're not going to get a post-credit scene, so just enough with that. We've had one post-credit scene in Star Wars television, and that was at season 2 of Mandalorian to announce
Andor.
Boba Fett.
Andor had an end credit scene too.
Oh, that's right.
With the
that's
Death
right. Like you mentioned, Brian, they keep talking about the High Council, but they haven't shown it. So give us somebody from the High Council. And one person that everybody knows from the High Council, because he talked about it in Empire Strikes Back, was Yoda. So unless that is the big mystery that, hey,
where's Yoda?
No, not that. Hey, the Jedi, that there's this secret virgins that they are trying to avoid telling the High Council about. That's my thing. So I'll say this: if the writing is as good as the last 2 episodes, and if you give us enough of wrap up from this season and then maybe leave a little cliffhanger for next season, maybe I could say, you know what? I'm not sold on this show, and how you did it, but maybe if you have another season and it's done better the way the last 2 episodes have, I'll bite. So that's kind of where I'm at. But for everybody that's loved the show, I'm so glad. Like I'll tell the character, the actor who plays Soul. I don't know if you guys read this.
Oh, yeah.
And he learned English because he loved Star Wars, and he got to play a main character in Star Wars. He learned English to play this character. If that's not passion about, what you do, I don't know, what is. And I think that's why, again, there's now, I think there is valid reasons that the Acolyte isn't clicking. He's not one of them. The guy who plays Master Soul, he is by far and away my favorite character in this entire series. So I want more of him if we get a season 2.
Steven, you got any predictions for the next episode?
Yeah, I think, May and Osha are the central characters that we've spent the most time with, right? And I think Nick said earlier tonight that we found out who the Acolyte was in the first 5 minutes. And I kind of disagree with him. I think, we were led to believe for most of the season that May was the Acolyte. But I think after episode 5 and going into 6, I think, Chimera has really focused on his attention on and his connection with Osha. And I think I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. It could go either way, whether Osha goes down that dark path and takes on the title of the Acolyte, maybe heading into another story somewhere else, season 2 or whatever, or if she stays on the light. I think the question is, like, if this really is the story from the dark perspective, maybe season 1 is all setting up a fallen Jedi, a Jedi that left the Order, who is going down to become something darker, whether we get a season 2 or something else. So I wouldn't be surprised if Osha does go down that dark path, and it might, kind of go against what we've seen, like Anakin turn back to the light and Kylo turn back to the light. Maybe Osha is someone that we're supposed to, see as the actual Acolyte. I don't know what that does for May, who's, I guess, now in custody, but I think that's my prediction. I think OSHA is going to maybe go down the dark path to set up a season 2 where she is fully committed to the dark side now. I don't know.
Fair enough. There is one aspect too we never really talked about that I do like, and it was brought up in this last episode, the 7th episode, how, and we kept calling them twins. Technically, I guess they're not technically twins. They're both like the same person. Remember they did the blood test and they weren't identical twins. They were basically the exact same person, just two sides of the same coin. So I want to see that fleshed out a little bit more too, because that, if that's the case, that is, we've never seen that before. That's different, and that's different than just, oh, they were a copycat of Anakin. No, this is completely now. Granted, I guess Anakin, there was two people there. There was Vader and Anakin that were but in the same body. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of reminiscent. Goes back to the rhyming thing we were talking about. But I do want to see that fleshed out. So I think next week we're going to be talking about ACOLYTE and kind of wrapping up on the series, talking about the finale, and maybe give our final thoughts on the series since we're going to have the entire show at that point. I know next week Yusuf is going to be on with us, and hopefully we can get JG on also and get a full crew going. I think that'd be a lot of fun to get everybody on again. So I think that's going to do it for tonight. I want to thank everyone that joined me tonight on the show. Hey, I want to thank Steven and Nick for hopping on. I know it's late where you're at, Steven, and I know it's almost 10 o'clock. We're recording this Friday night, so I know it's getting late where Nick's at also. So I'm glad and grateful y'all hopped on to help relaunch the show. It feels really good to be back on the mic and talking about our favorite thing in the world. So let us know below, what are your thoughts on the ACOLYTE so far, and how you think this thing is going to wrap up. Just keep it civil in the comment section. That's all I ask. We're going to be policing the comments pretty good for anything that has to do with ACOLYTE, because we've seen what some people are capable of. So until next week, guys, this is the Star Wars Canon Podcast crew signing off. May the Force be with you. You've just been listening to the Star Wars Canon Podcast. You can catch new episodes of the podcast every Saturday night at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time on whatever platform you're listening on right now. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit those like and subscribe buttons and give us a follow so you're notified whenever new content drops. If you'd like to get a mailbag question on the show, you can email us at starwarscanonpodcast@gmail.com, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and check out our website, www.starwarscanon.net. Those links can be found in the description of this episode. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the speaker and may not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of everyone else involved on the panel. This show is produced and edited by me, Brian Miller, with music composed by Brook Munro.